Welcome to Week 4 of Theatre 191, The World of the Play. What does the world of the play mean? When we think of a play, we want to think about it as a world unto itself. This is what is explained in your reading for this week, E.F.'s Visit to a Small Planet. Each world of a play is unique. It may look very similar to our own world, but it's just different enough that it has its own sets of rules and logic that make up the world. Everything in a play is on purpose, which means that everything in a play is part of the whole, even things that don't seem like it at first. So when something sticks out to you in the world of the play, know that the playwright didn't just make it up to be there. They are doing that on purpose to make meaning in this world of the play. Because a play can be like our world, and yet it will function with its own internal set of logic. What makes sense because it is part of the whole. So now we'll look at the end of Fences to sort of think more about this point. The world of the play in Fences is very similar to our own world. However, it's not quite the same. Let's look at the very end. This is the final moment of Fences. Gabriel says, "Hey, Rose, it's time. It's time to tell St. Peter to open the gates. Troy, you ready? You ready, Troy? I'm going to tell St. Peter to open the gates. You get ready now." And then we have this wonderful stage direction. Gabriel, with great fanfare, braces himself to blow. The trumpet is without a mouthpiece. He puts the end of it into his mouth and blows with great force, like a man who has been waiting some 20-odd years for this single moment. No sound comes out of the trumpet. He braces himself and blows again with the same result. A third time he blows. There is a weight of impossible description that falls away and leaves him bare and exposed to a frightful realization. It is a trauma that a sane and normal mind would be unable to withstand. He begins to dance. A slow, strange dance, eerie and life-giving. A dance of atavistic signature and ritual. Lyons attempts to embrace him. Gabriel pushes Lyons away. He begins to howl in what is an attempt at song, or perhaps a song turning back into itself in an attempt at speech. He finishes his dance, and the gates of heaven stand open as wide as God's closet. That's the way that go. Blackout. End of play. So in this scene, we have a world that's our world. It's the 1950s. It's Pittsburgh. We have spent the entire play learning about the rules of the world, which are very similar to our own. And yet, at the end, through Gabriel's dance, he is able to actually open the gates of heaven, which is beyond and above the world of our world. But we know that it's true because the playwright wrote it. So when we're thinking about the world of the play, it's about the truth of the world of the play, which is very close to our actual world. But if you read more of the plays in the Century Cycle, you'll realize there are rules that govern the whole of the logic of how characters interact across plays. Wilson didn't just write a world, he wrote a universe. Characters across plays are interconnected, telling a story that is linked across 10 plays and an entire century of time. And throughout all of these century plays, there's an element of magic and performance that allows things to happen that would not happen in our everyday life. We would never know if the gates of heaven opened in our everyday life, but in the play, that's real. And that's one of the things we're pointing to when we're thinking about the world of the play. Let's unpack this world of the play a little bit more with Fences. It is the real world. It's the real world in the 1950s in Pittsburgh, PA. It's the real world, but in that world, Gabriel is able to call up to heaven, and that is also part of the real world. Now, in plays, especially plays that count as realism, like Fences and Moon for the Misbegotten, the world is almost like our own, but with some theatrical exceptions. If we were just like the real world, it would not be interesting enough. So we want to look for those theatricalities, because plays take on a moment that is beyond and above what would happen in our everyday life. And that's what makes them interesting to watch, right? What makes the story worth telling. And playwrights are able to manipulate the world to make the story even more interesting. Here's a little bit of information about our next playwright, Eugene O'Neill. He's one of the first American playwrights to experiment with what was known as psychological realism on stage. He helped change American playwriting from melodrama, which is what was primarily on the stages in the 19th century, to the realism that we are more used to today. People often compare his style of playwriting to Heinrich Ibsen, who wrote A Doll's House and Hedda Gabler, plays that are still performed today. Anton Chekhov, who is the Russian playwright who wrote... Now let's take a few moments to talk about Eugene O'Neill, who was born in 1888 and died in 1953. Eugene O'Neill is one of the first American playwrights to experiment with what would be known as psychological realism on stage. At the time, novelists and filmmakers were also experimenting with psychological realism, and that type of drama is what's responsible for a lot of the types of stories that we see on stage and in film and in television today. O'Neill helped to change American playwriting from melodrama, which was what was popular in the 19th century, to the realism that we're more used to. People often compare his style of playwriting to the famous Norwegian playwright Heinrich Ibsen, who wrote A Doll's House and Hedda Gabler, Anton Chekhov, who wrote The Three Sisters and The Seagull and Cherry Orchard, all of which were plays that were used by Stanislavski to develop what is known as contemporary acting style today, and August Strindberg, who is also well known for this type of drama in Scandinavia. O'Neill was born to a famous Irish immigrant actor, James O'Neill. He was a great tragedian, and he toured all the time. So he grew up with theatrical influences, and he spent his summers as a boy in Connecticut. Moon for the Misbegotten, which is set in Connecticut, was the last play Eugene O'Neill wrote that was published and performed in his lifetime. Several of his other plays, which were very autobiographical, were published afterwards. He won many awards and was definitely part of the avant-garde of American playwriting at the turn of the 20th century. He won the Pulitzer Prize for playwriting 4 times for Beyond the Horizon in 1920, Anna Christie in 1922, Strange Interlude in 1928, and Long Day's Journey into Night, which was written in 1941 and performed in 1956, winning the Pulitzer Prize in 1957. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1936, and he has had a lasting impact on American plays. Now let's talk briefly about Moon for the Misbegotten. Moon for the Misbegotten takes place in the same world, which is semi-autographical to Eugene O'Neill's own life, as his most famous play, Long Day's Journey into Night. That is a highly touted as O'Neill's best work, and the one that he won his last award for posthumously. It's also deeply autobiographical, and you can see O'Neill and all of his siblings and his parents. Jim Tyrone's father, who is mentioned in both Moon for the Misbegotten and featured in Long Day's Journey into Night, is based on his own father, the touring actor. So the character of Jim Tyrone is featured in both plays, and that's one of the characters you'll get to know in this play. In his review of the 2007 production, New York Times critic Ben Brentley wrote, reflecting on the prior 2 revivals of Moon for the Misbegotten, that both those versions emphasized the pathos of Moon. Written in 1943 and first produced on Broadway in 1957, it's inspired by the unhappy final chapters in the life of O'Neill's ne'er-do-well older brother James. The play is singular within its author's body of work for its forgiving spirit. Long Day's Journey into Night is a deeply tragic piece. Now, the 1973 revival, which is widely touted as one of the best versions of it, is what we'll be watching for class. Now let's dig a little bit more into the world of Moon for the Misbegotten to help you better understand and read the play. Eugene O'Neill employs language from the 1920s, slang and otherwise, to make the world real. He wrote this in the late 40s, but because language changes so quickly, O'Neill employs language to make the period more real for the audience, so they would remember these 1920s style slang in the 1940s, and also the way that they use it makes it different from the contemporary world, so you know you're in the past. Some words defined. As I said, words change quickly, and this play is set in the early 1920s, 1923. So when they use the word queer, which we use very differently today, they mostly mean strange and odd. When they're talking about the DTs or the heebie-jeebies, they're talking about delirium tremens, which is a thing that happens to the body when it has had too much alcohol or has not had enough alcohol, and to an addicted body specifically. And often there will be hallucinations involved with the delirium tremens or the DTs. There's a glossary of terms from the play attached to this unit for you to look over if you get tripped up on a word. So if you're not sure, look it up. Indulge your curiosity. Now let's discuss a little bit more about the context of the world of Moon for the Misbegotten. Because it is set in a historical moment and it is close to the real world, it's important to remember that in 1923, prohibition was legal in the United States, which was a period from 1920 to 1933 when alcohol was illegal. So all of the alcohol in this play is actually an illegal act. Something to keep in mind. Alcoholism and the urge to drink is part of the psychological realism that O'Neill uses to motivate his characters. So those things are interconnected. While we don't think of being a 28-year-old, which is the age Josie is supposed to be in the play, as being very old to be married, in the 1920s, that would be quite old, and she would be considered an old maiden aunt. Now, there weren't many laws about sexual assault, and for those of you who have not read the play yet, there is some talk of sexual assault in the third act. It's nothing graphic. There weren't many laws about sexual assault, and we can see the way that we talk about women and drunks and sexuality has changed significantly from the 1920s and the 1940s to today. O'Neill also employs time and place specifically in the way that he's making this world. Fences took place over a long period of time, but Moon for the Misbegotten takes place in a little under 24 hours. So it's a full day. And that's a traditional Aristotelian structure. An Aristotelian coming from the great Greek thinker Aristotle, who taught us most of what we think about Western theater to begin with 2,000 years ago. Specifically, we're talking about the unities. Unity of action, unity of time, unity of space. Which means that the action takes place in a day. Every single scene follows directly after the next one. Unity of time, it's all in one place, right? And unity of space, the whole play takes place in the same location. The only difference in O'Neill's play is that one of the walls is removed so that we can see the inside of the house in the second act. And remember, everything is specific in the way that he is putting these things together. So why does O'Neill take only a day to tell this story? Because it's important that it's just that day. And we're zooming in on just how important this day is from every other day. And finally, as you read, a word about Eugene O'Neill's stage directions. O'Neill was famous for not trusting actors or directors to make choices on their own, and he wrote extensive stage directions. So while many stage directions that you read in a play come from an initial production and were put in by the stage manager or other people before publication, for Eugene O'Neill, those are the directions that he wrote into his script on purpose. So that's from the playwright's brain straight to the page. So these directions give us very clear ideas of what the action is on stage. And as you watch the film version of the 1973 production and read the script, consider how faithful the production was to the stage directions, because they are very specific and should be painting very clear pictures in your head. And finally, to prepare for this week's readiness assessment test, read the play thinking about the world of the play and the characters in it. Who are these people? What are they doing? How is the world constructed? Is it the same as our world? How is it not? Those are the questions I want you to sort of be thinking about. Watch the film version of the play, and if you're having trouble with the dialect in the text, this will help a lot. Now, if you have trouble with the dialects, the Irish brogue in the movie, the play text should be right there, so you can really look at them side to side. You should read E.F.'s Visit to a Small Planet, which is a short article that will help you really think about the world of the play and what are the rules to make that world real. Finally, your questions will be on comprehension of the play's content regarding the world of the play, character, and action, and you'll also be tested on information from this video. So pay attention to key times and dates. All right, enjoy the play.